gel shrinks or liquefies, it forms these little worm-like strands or little clumps that float around in your eye. And typically, if you have floaters, you see them when you look at a bright background like the bright blue sky or maybe a bright white wall. How do you develop floaters? Well, as we age, that vitreous gel can start to liquefy. It can also shrink away from the retina, and when it does so, it can cause those floaters. Now, not everybody develops floaters as they age. If you look at the literature, about 60% of people over the age of 60 will have some degree of vitreous changes, including floaters. Now, there's also other conditions that can cause floaters. One is called advanced diabetic retinopathy. We can also see floaters associated with retinal detachment, retinal tears, and also high myopia. How do we treat floaters? So before I go into how we treat floaters, first I want to reassure you that floaters are usually harmless. That being said, if you do have floaters and they're really bothering you, they're kind of driving you crazy, we do have some options to help get rid of those floaters. But it's important to understand the risks and benefits of each of the treatments. So one treatment for floaters is a procedure called a Now, this is a surgery that involves going inside the eye and removing that liquefied vitreous gel and replacing it with either air or silicone oil. Now, this is the most effective treatment for floaters, but it does come with its own set of risks and complications. About 75% of people who undergo a vitrectomy for floaters are very satisfied with the results. But 25% of people are either not satisfied or their satisfaction is only fair. And that's because when you go in there to remove the floaters, sometimes you can end up with other complications. You can end up with a retinal tear, retinal detachment. You can also end up with endophthalmitis, which is an infection inside the eye. And another complication we can see is what's called a posterior vitreous detachment. So if you remember earlier, I said that floaters are caused by the vitreous gel liquefying and shrinking away from the retina. Well, if you already have a PVD or a posterior vitreous detachment, that means that the vitreous gel is no longer attached to anything. So if you go in and remove any remaining floaters, that vitreous gel has nothing to attach to and it can end up floating around in your eye. And that's called a persistent high. Another risk with vitrectomy surgery is you may need to get a second surgery to remove that silicone oil that we replaced the vitreous with. Also, the day of surgery, you will have a big bandage contact lens on your eye, and some people find that pretty uncomfortable. Also, your vision will be blurry for several days after surgery until that silicone oil clears out. And finally, some people experience dry eyes after surgery. The other option for treating floaters is a procedure called a Now, this is a non-invasive procedure that uses a laser to break up those floaters. Now, this is less invasive than a surgical vitrectomy, but it still carries its own risks and complications. About 70 to 80% of people who undergo laser floater therapy are satisfied with their results. And the reasons why they are not satisfied is similar to the reasons why people are unsatisfied with the surgical vitrectomy. You can have retinal tears, retinal detachment, endophthalmitis. And another reason is that sometimes the laser can't reach all the floaters in your eye. And that is just because the floaters are too far away from the center of your eye where the laser can reach. With this procedure, you don't get a replacement like you would with a surgical vitrectomy. But there are some studies showing that your body can reabsorb those fragmented floaters naturally. Now, with laser floater therapy. You won't have a bandage contact lens on the day of surgery, but you will have numbing drops in your eyes. And just like with the surgical vitrectomy, your vision will be blurry for several days until those fragmented floaters disperse. Now, what about just leaving the floaters alone? Well, that's an option too. Now, if you're bothered by your floaters, that's definitely not the best option for you. But most floaters are harmless, and they don't cause any long-term damage to your eyes. And that's based on multiple studies that have looked at people with floaters, even people who have severe floaters, and they found that their vision was intact. They didn't have any long-term damage to their eyes. The next question is, what can increase your risk of having floaters? Well, the biggest thing that we know of is having a history of trauma to your eye. So if you've had blunt trauma to your eye in the past, that can increase your risk of developing floaters. And that's because blunt trauma to your eye can cause that vitreous gel to liquefy. There was a study done in 2008 that looked at 900 college students. and they found that 4.3% of those students had symptoms of vitreous floaters. But if you look at those who had a history of trauma, that number jumped up to 30.4%. Also, people who have diabetes or who smoke are also at increased risk of developing floaters. What can you do to prevent floaters? Well, unfortunately, there's not a lot that you can do. As we mentioned earlier, floaters are typically age-related, and they occur when the vitreous gel shrinks away from the retina and liquefies. So, there's nothing really you can do to prevent that. However, there are some studies suggesting that taking certain vitamins and minerals, like vitamin C, vitamin E, and zinc can slow down the development of cataracts and age-related macular degeneration. And since the vitreous gel makes up the majority of the structure of your eye, those same nutrients might help prevent age-related changes to the vitreous gel. Now, if you do develop floaters, what can you do to help decrease the appearance of them? Well, one thing that's been shown to work is doing a beam ultrasound. We'll put an ultrasound probe on your eyelids, and that sends sound waves through your eye that can help break up the floaters. Now, this is not painful, but it's also not completely painless-free. You will feel a little bit of pressure on your eyelids. Another thing that can help is doing a YAG laser. Now, this is a neodymium YAG laser that we send a laser through the center of your pupil, and that laser creates a bright flash that helps break up the floaters. Again, this is not painful, but you will feel some pressure on your eyelids and some bright flashes of light. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them down below. As always, I hope you learned something new here today.